right, everyone. Welcome to the week 5 video. This week, I'm going to be giving you some peer feedback reminders for your summary and synthesis assignment and for the other assignments in this class. We're going to talk briefly about your final draft for your summary and synthesis that's due this week. We're going to introduce Unit 3, and then we're going to talk about Chapter 7 in your textbook. So, your writing warm-up for this week. Remember, you don't have to turn these in. These are just exercises for you to get comfortable with writing and to start practicing writing. What TV series are you currently watching or have you watched recently? Who do you identify as the intended audience, the most likely group to watch it for that TV series? Is the show effective or ineffective at appealing to that intended audience? Why or why not? Note, you can also write about a book series, podcast, or any number of media that you've consumed recently, as long as you look at audience. All right, so this past week, week 4, on Friday, you turned in your summary and synthesis drafts for peer feedback. This Monday, you're going to be giving feedback, just like you did with the language autoethnography assignments. Remember, you should be utilizing the review questions in the instructions of the peer feedback forum. They're meant to guide you. If you're asking these questions as you're reviewing the draft, then you're going to be doing ample work for your fellow classmates. And remember, this is something that I noticed when I was going through and grading the feedback for the language autoethnography. You are assigned to give feedback on 2 of your peers' papers. On each paper, you're going to make a minimum of 3 comments. That's 2 marginal, 1 summative. We talked about a few weeks ago now with the language autoethnography assignment that these are probably going to look like all marginal comments. I gave you examples in those videos. But 2 marginal means 2 brief comments focusing on a specific area. 1 summative is going to be looking at the whole paper. In total, you're going to make a minimum of 6 comments, 4 marginal, 2 summative, over the 2 papers. You're going to want to make these comments in separate comment boxes so that you receive full credit. I mentioned grading the language autoethnography feedback. I noticed that a few students did not make a minimum of 6 comments. Therefore, you're only getting partial credit on your peer feedback. This should be an easy A. Make sure you're making those minimum comments. It's the least you can do for your fellow classmates because you'd want them to do it for you as well, but also for that credit. Okay, this Wednesday, you have your final draft of your summary and synthesis essay due. Remember, that's going to include that opening paragraph that synthesizes a conversation around 2 texts. You're going to select those 2 texts. If you can hear my cat in the audio, I apologize. You're going to have an opening paragraph that synthesizes a conversation around 2 texts. Those are going to be 2 texts that you select from the Unit 2 folder. They're not 2 texts just from anywhere. They're the ones we've been looking at specifically in this course. You're going to include summaries of the 2 texts and explain the context of the text and the author's main arguments and ideas. You'll want to keep in mind audiences. Your primary audience for this assignment is college students. Your secondary audience is college writing teachers. Your third audience is your gatekeeper audience. This is the editor of the anthology. Remember that for this assignment, you've been asked to create a little section, a little inclusion that is going to go into an anthology. Your gatekeeper audience then is the editor who can prevent you from reaching your primary audience and your secondary audience. So when you're choosing your language for this draft, make sure you're being mindful of your audience as well. And then you're also going to have that writer's memo, which is 300 words minimum. It's going to identify 3 specific choices that you made when you were writing your draft and explores why they were made. Okay. So now let's talk a bit about Unit 3 and the rhetorical analysis assignment. You're going to want to select a text to analyze. That's your first step. This is going to come from the Unit 3 reading folder. These are the same readings as you used in the Unit 2. Then you're going to want to assess the effectiveness or ineffectiveness, partial effectiveness, or somewhat effectiveness of the rhetor's claims and arguments, and assess the rhetor's various choices and strategies throughout the text. You're going to talk about 3 rhetorical devices or appeals minimum. You might end up talking about 4, but 3 is the minimum that you have to talk about. You're wanting to consider the intended audience of the text, the purpose, and the medium. You will be using rhetorical concepts and terms to explore and explain. So we talked about at the very beginning of the semester why it's important to consider audience, stance, purpose, and medium, because it all relays into the effectiveness of a message. You'll probably remember this from our Unit 1 discussions, and I remember mentioning in the Unit 1 lessons that we would come back to this, and here we are. So remember, audience is receivers of the message. Intended audience is going to be the most important thing here. Who is this message designed for? You're going to want to think beyond just age-specific categories. So typically whenever we think about who is it intended for, something that might come to mind is ratings for films, movies. So you have like PG-13. So that means parental guidance 13 years or older. Or you might have 17 plus, so people who are 17 years or older can view this movie or should view this movie. Whenever we're thinking about effectiveness of rhetoric, we don't want to think in that kind of terms. You can consider that a message may be best for college age students from age 17 to 25. But if you heard, I already accidentally inserted the more specific language. I included college age students. So that's a specific category that's been applied to this age group. We're going to want to start thinking about how specific can we get with our intended audience. And the more specific you are, the more likely you're going to be able to get at if this is really effective or not. Purpose, the why of a message. Why is the rhetor doing this? What do they intend for their audience to think, feel, believe by the time that they view this text? Does it work? Is it effective? Are they achieving this purpose, or are there unintended things happening here? Stance, a rhetor's position. Probably the more simple one of them. What does the rhetor think, feel, believe about the topic? Have they changed their mind in recent years, which may require a little bit of research? And then medium, how a message is sent or presented. What's the format? Is it an article? Is it a video? Is it an infographic, etc., etc.? And why this form of medium? How is this going to how is this going to be received by that intended audience? Does it add to the purpose? Does it make clear the author's stance? Okay, so for your rhetorical analysis, in this video, we're just going to kind of introduce you to it. We're not going to talk about it super in depth because next week we're going to be looking at like actual rhetorical terms that you may or may not be familiar with. This week, we're just going to be overviewing it. So the brief structure for this rhetorical analysis, it's 4 to 5 pages, which is going to be one of the longer assignments in this class. You should have an introduction. This is going to include a brief summary of your selected text. And it's also going to have your thesis statement that you establish your analysis and argument for effectiveness or ineffectiveness or partial or somewhat effectiveness. You'll have your first rhetorical device or appeal that you've selected. And then, just like we've been talking about in the other assignments for this class, you want to make sure that you include what device or appeal, how is the rhetor using it? This is where you're going to pull quotes or examples from the text. Why is the rhetor using it? What's its purpose? And is it effective? Then you're going to have second rhetorical device appeal, what, how, why. Third rhetorical device appeal, what, how, why. And then your conclusion is going to have that so what question being answered. You should move towards a new understanding. What do we gain as readers, as people who have joined the conversation that's happening in this text? What do we gain whenever we understand the rhetorical devices or appeals that are being utilized by the rhetor in this text? Okay, So chapter 7 in your textbook is what you're to read this week. This is going to talk about rhetorical context, and then we're going to also talk about textual and contextual analysis. First, rhetorical context. You have an assignment this week that also asks you to identify rhetorical context. So how do you do that? First, you're going to want to identify the rhetor. Who is the author? What do they think, feel, believe about X, whatever their topic is? What situated ethos do they have? What do they value? What can you learn about them? And again, this may take some outside research. A note here, situated ethos. You've probably heard the term ethos before. Ethos has to deal with character and credibility. You'll learn in this class that there are two types of ethos, situated and invented ethos. Situated ethos is ethos, character or credibility, that a rhetor has before you encounter their text. So it could be that they have published in this magazine before. It could be that they frequently talk on TEDx. And it could be that their audience is familiar with them. Either way, it's important to consider situated ethos because it might impact the effectiveness of an article or of a text. You want to identify the intended audience. What do they, the intended audience, think, feel, believe about X? Explore their often different beliefs and values. What can you learn about them? What can you learn about this category of people, this specific category of people? Again, you want to think bigger than just age categories. Be specific as possible. Consider if there are multiple audiences. Just like we through your summary and synthesis assignment, you had 3 audiences. The text that you're looking at may have primary, secondary audiences. They may have a gatekeeper audience. You're going to want to identify the intended purpose. What does the text and the rhetor want the audience to think, feel, believe after engaging with it? Does the rhetor achieve this? Why or why not? You want to identify the exigence in larger conversations. What problem or problems, that's the exigence, is the rhetor responding to? Research how or if the rhetor has changed stances on the exigence over time. What larger conversations are happening in the text to problems outside of it? How does this impact the text's purpose? Then you'll want to identify the unintended effects. Consider when you read how the text is received. Is it received in a way that is aligned with its purpose? Are there unintentional effects? If so, how do these impact the effectiveness? For example, does the rhetor contradict themselves? Do they not acknowledge that growth has happened here, that they have changed their stance? These are all things that you should be considering as you're reading text. I would strongly advise you, if you have the means, you can either print out the text that you're looking at or the transcript of it if you're doing one of the videos, and go through and very deliberately highlight using different colors or different pens where you see different rhetorical devices and things in play. Write down what you note using your own handwriting because it'll make it ingrain much better into your brain. And you might be surprised with what you find doing this. Okay, so thinking about rhetorical analysis, there are kind of 2 styles that you can take whenever you're approaching this. The first is going to be textual analysis. The second is going to be contextual analysis. So textual analysis focuses on the choices that the rhetor made in constructing the text. This is closely looking at the rhetor's usage of rhetorical appeals or devices within the text. For example, this can be invented ethos, pathos, logos. We talked about situated ethos just a moment ago. Invented ethos then is ethos that is created within the text. This is going to be, just as listed here, probably the rhetorical analysis that you're more familiar with, that you may have written either recently in high school or a while back in high school, or in any of your other classes where they've asked you to do rhetorical analysis, where you talk about ethos, pathos, logos. That's a textual analysis. Contextual analysis is going to focus on the context surrounding the text, showing how the text responds to the context. This is going to be really useful for engaging with the larger conversations that are going on in the exegents. It closely looks at rhetor's uses of rhetorical devices or appeals that engage with context outside of the text, such as kairos, ideology, and situated ethos. Both are valid forms of rhetorical analysis, so the choice is yours. You can do one or the other, you can mix them together, however you'd like to approach this, as long as you talk about 3 rhetorical devices or appeals minimum. I will also note right now, if I'm saying these rhetorical terms and devices to you and you have absolutely no clue what I'm talking about, don't worry. Next week, we're going to go really in depth and talk about these rhetorical devices and appeals and what they look like, what they mean, and how we can practice looking at them so that we understand them whenever we're approaching the text. Right now, I just want you to start thinking about if you want to look at what's happening within the text, or if you want to look at how the text is talking about with things outside of it. Okay, so your assignment for this week, due on Friday, I believe, is summary of choice and discussion of choice. First, you're going to want to draft a summary of the text you've chosen to write your rhetorical analysis on. You're going to want to point out the author's main claims and how they support them and use attributed tags. So remember, we're going to be practicing MLA in text citation and MLA works cited pages. Avoid inserting your opinion. It should be very much so removed. Oh my goodness, I'm blanking on the word. Objective. There we go. Your writing should be objective. C, explain the author's reasoning or evidence to support their major ideas, and use your own words to restate the author's argument. So try not to pull any quotes right now. In your summary, you shouldn't use any quotes. Second, it asks you to explain the rhetorical context for the text you're analyzing. Address the following questions. Who is the author? Where was it published? What is the key information? Who is the intended audience? What are the intended audience's beliefs or values? What is the exigence? What is the author's purpose? And what is any additional information or questions that you feel is important to the rhetorical context? Okay, so something that might be really useful for you is to pick one of the texts that you wrote over for your summary and synthesis assignment. Or if you'd like to try your hand at analyzing another one, go for it. Either way, right now, we're just going to be talking about rhetorical context. And you can use these questions here to help you do this assignment. They're also further detailed in your textbook in Chapter 7 if you want a little bit more aid. Okay, for this week, on Monday, you need to respond to 2 classmates' summary and synthesis drafts. That's through Feedback Fruits. It's the same link that you submitted it on. Remember, that's a minimum of 6 comments total, 3 and 3. For Wednesday, you're going to read the prompt for Unit 3, which is your rhetorical analysis essay that we've introduced here. You're going to read Chapter 7 and answer the questions in your textbook. And you're going to submit final summary and synthesis essays with your 300-word writer's memo. For Friday, you're going to have that initial post of summary and discussion of choice. And remember, all deadlines are on U.S. Central Time. We're stationed out of Lubbock here at Texas Tech, so make sure that you're being mindful of the deadlines so that you're not submitting things late. 11:59 U.S. Central Time. Okay, as always, if you have any questions, use that Q&A forum or send me an email. Otherwise, take care.